Hey, it's Dave. Welcome back to my channel. So, the little intro there was a piece of a song called Crying to the Sky by Bebop Deluxe. Somebody had kept asking me to play it, and I really didn't know the song. Actually, I really didn't know much Bebop Deluxe, but I love Bill Nelson's solo stuff, and I love the stuff he did with David Sylvian. So I learned like the front half of that solo, because I literally haven't had much time to listen to it. I learned the front half and then kind of just played what I wanted as it went on. In fact, it's kind of what I want to talk about today, is guys like Bill Nelson, David Sylvian. And somebody made a comment on one of my videos where I was talking about album sales, and they were like, album sales does not have anything to do with what is good or what has worth. And as much as I could argue both sides of that, the point I wanted to make is why I sometimes bring up record sales and as a part of when I talk about things. And a lot of it has to do with people, when they discuss things as the best, or they make a list of what they think is like viable list of what I think the best is, and really what they're saying is it's their favorite. Because there is no criteria that they have or that they're listing to say what could formulate what would make this the best. So when people tell me like, oh, Hendrix is the best guitar player, period, I'm like, under what criteria? Not in my criteria. I don't really like his songs, so that's a huge part of the criteria for me for what I like. It's just not my thing. Now, I do like what a lot of Hendrix influenced. And obviously this song, Crying to the Sky, that Bill Nelson did, has a serious Hendrix vibe going on that he plays. And also it's very similar to like what Uli Roth kind of picked up in the early 80s out of the Hendrix stuff that he enjoyed. The spacey, ethereal solos with the heavy fuzz and phase on it, or univibe on it. But anyways, the point I'm making is that record sales will tell you what's something called accessibility. How accessible is a song, and how many people reacted positively to it, which is a great meter when you're coming up with a criteria for what is good. If you want to argue about, let's say, the best country rock band, and someone's going to say it's Poco, and another guy says it's the Eagles, we can then look at record sales as a factor of being, well, look how many people the Eagles have moved to go out and buy their music. And then you could say, well, the radio stations play it all the time and people are brainwashed. No, the radio stations are playing it because people request it and they want to hear it. When the radio plays something we don't want to hear, we turn it. It's just very accessible music. And a lot of times that's how radio stations even pick their songs. I remember hearing about when somebody turned the record Roxanne on and played it on a radio station, and they kept playing it and kept getting requests for it. And that kind of what made the Police take off. So something definitely has to have some value going into that. And record sales are definitely a meter. And so we could take a look at an artist like Bill Nelson, and I can listen to Crying to the Sky, and I can tell you right now, if John Mayer were to sing it and put his stamp on it with his guitar tone, that song would be a known hit, at least to the John Mayer fans, because it has all the elements there. It's a little out there as far as the vocal, and then his guitar tone on the album is a little heavy fuzz, and it's it almost sounds like a humbucker, like it would be like a jazz guitar playing it with fuzz and everything else. There's something about it that I push away from, that I wish it were cleaner. And because of that, I think a lot of people will listen to it and not try to analyze it the way I do or have that kind of an ear, but basically to say, yeah, I don't care for it. But in the right context, you put that song over here to have somebody do it, and then you have a hit. And by that, I mean, if you take a song by, there was a band called PhD in the early 80s that had a song called Little Susie. Go look up Little Susie by PhD on YouTube. Listen to the song, and then listen to Tesla do it, and you could see right away, oh, they heard something in the song that the band wasn't conveying to the crowd, to the audience, that made it such an accessible song, that made it what it was. And we can see that just by record sales. I mean, I don't have to sit there and I'm showing you that you can listen to the difference. And now some people are going to say, yeah, but the PhD one is much better. Yes, you may enjoy it more because it hits you. And there's no arguing that. I can't sit there and try to get inside your head and be like, well, yeah, but what I'm saying is, in the big picture of things, if I have money and I'm paying you to make the recording, or I'm paying people to do the work to find the records that are going to sell and make money, I want to hire the guys that's going to get that Tesla record made, not the guys that are getting the PhD record made. So it is a business in that aspect, that there are people that want a certain amount of accessibility. And, I mean, to sit there and say, you know, that we aren't all victims of this. I mean, Hendrix sold millions of albums. Zeppelin sold millions, hundreds of millions of albums. The Stones, the Beatles, all these bands that are so big and iconic sold hundreds of millions of albums. Well, Hendrix didn't sell hundreds, but I think he's up in the 60s worldwide or something, 60 million albums. But the point I'm making is you have to have some form of a criteria when you're coming up with a determination of a fact as opposed to an opinion poll. And you have to, you know, form a criteria, and then you should display that criteria when you're talking about it. You know, people always tell me, oh, Neil Peart's the best drummer. He's the best drummer. Oh, you're an idiot if you don't think Neil Peart's the best drummer. What criteria is it that it's the best drummer? Because he doesn't make it in the top 25 of mine. So I don't know. But I don't get me wrong. I love listening to him play, and I love Rush. I mean, I went and saw them on the... what was that last tour I saw them on? I saw them on the Washer and Dryer tour where they had the... No, it was the Washer and Dryer. They had the rotisserie chickens in one of the amplifiers. I forget what tour that was. And then I also saw them when they went and did Moving Pictures, the album tour, recently. And when I say recently, I mean maybe 2011, 10. But anyways, but I'm a big fan, and I love Rush. To me, he's just not my... I wouldn't put him as one of the best drummers of all time. He's one of my favorites. But if we sat there and said, what do we look for in a drummer? He just wouldn't have it for me. And I would tell you what that criteria is, and it wouldn't fit in for me. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't go around saying... in fact, when people talk to me about drummers all the time, I always will make a statement of fact. Like I will say, well, I think Vinnie Colaiuta might be technically one of the greatest drummers. I mean, I'm not going to say anything more than that. He's just one of the greatest drummers, and a super guy, whatever. He's just one of the greatest drummers ever. But my favorite is Jeff Porcaro. When I hear Jeff Porcaro on a record, I'm like, there's that groove. There's what I want to hear when I hear drums. It's that smoothness, that something you can't get from a machine. Something that's just, there's a je ne sais quoi, if you will. But it's perfect. It's the way I like it. Bernard Purdy's another one of my favorite drummers. Steve Gadd is a favorite drummer of mine. There's a lot of jazz guys that I really like a lot too. But anyways, this is not about what my favorites are. This is just me talking about accessibility. So anyways, so Bill Nelson had this band Bebop Deluxe, and I like them. From what I've been listening to the last couple of days, I've listened to a bunch of different records. And, of course, I love Bill Nelson. I like his voice. I don't think it's as marketable in the Bebop Deluxe package as it is when I heard... Now, he has an album, and if you can get it, if it's still in print and you can find it, I would get it. It's called Getting the Holy Ghost Across. It's one of my favorites. In fact, I think that album is like a perfect album. I could put it on. It's a vibey, chill record. It's just a great, great album. But that's a Bill Nelson album to check out. And there's a lot of great music out there that's not very accessible radio-wise. And now probably because CDs are becoming a dying thing, they may not even be in print. But I would recommend the Blue Nile Hats to anybody. I think that's a great album. In LA, that was kind of like among the musicians, everyone was kind of like, giving the nod. So that's a great album. There's a lot of stuff that came out after Soul to Soul came out with Keep On Moving and however, what was the other one they did? Back to Life. That kind of formed this style of music that they call acid jazz. And that's kind of like what I'm going to be working on soon in a project where I'll be playing bass. But acid jazz is kind of like funk with a little bit of jazz flavor in it, with the, you know, jazz piano and whatnot. And you know, they kind of started that thing. They were probably the most accessible at it. The Brand New Heavies was a great band, and the Brother Sister album is an album I recommend. There was an album that Gary Katz from who produced Steely Dan, produced called Ross Stylus Pushing Against the Flow, and that's a great album. There's so many great records that are out there that have not have a big record sales. And so when I talk about record sales, that doesn't mean those albums are not good. It just means in that criteria of accessibility and whatever it was that got it out there, it got it out there. And just because a record made a lot of money and sold a lot of albums doesn't mean it's bad. And it doesn't mean it's good or great, but it means it's accessible, and that's something. That means it reached a lot of people, and that's what we try to do. I mean, just imagine if you were in a band and you could play a song that you wrote and people in the front were loving it up and they just can't get enough of it and they're paying you money to perform it. You'd be like, hello, this is what you want. And the more people you reach, you know, there's a great interview, I think it's with Mark Farner, where he talks about writing I'm Your Captain, and in '71 selling out Shea Stadium. And he was saying how amazing that was, that they were there to, at that point, he was the only writer in the band, and at that point, they were all there to hear his songs. And to him, filling a stadium like that, it floored him. It's something he'll never forget his whole life. And that's very important. That's kind of like what I'm talking about. It's that accessibility of, you know, it's just a meter. And it's a meter I'm going to use, and I'm going to use it again and again. It doesn't mean it's the end-all, be-all. It's just when I'm using it as a meter, I'm using it in that criteria that I've come up with. But, I mean, anyone can make any criteria to make it fit their arguments. I mean, that's like what everybody does anyways, you know. When somebody likes an album that's not popular, well, then album sales don't mean anything. When someone loves an album that's sold more albums than anything, that's the lead into their argument. So it's not about, you know, arguing music. And, of course, arguing music is one of the funnest things we could ever do. I mean, I have a friend of mine, we used to, in high school, every time I'd see him at a party, there'd be like 3 or 4 of us, and we'd all be discussing the final cut. Ad nauseum. We would just be constantly talking about the final cut. It's just, you know, that was like what we enjoyed talking about. It's an album that not many people knew or gave credit to, and we all loved it, so we would talk about it. So, I do pay a certain amount of respect when someone keeps saying, "Check, what about this Bill Nelson?" Because I love that. Because first of all, I know who Bill Nelson is. I was a fan of his stuff in the 80s when he went and did a lot of the solo stuff. I was familiar lightly with Bebop Deluxe, but not so much. But I like the fact when people like stuff outside the box. You know, bands like Japan, you know, which, of course, I think were pretty good. However, I think when David Sylvian went solo, and if anyone has the chance to go out and buy Gone to Earth, Robert Fripp, Bill Nelson on guitar, it's fantastic. Gone to Earth by David Sylvian's a great record. Again, didn't really sell, but that's not the important factor in everything. And I didn't want to make that a point that it's a factor in everything. It's only a factor when it's a factor. And the factor is, and this is honest, I love that David Sylvian Gone to Earth album, but you may buy it and fucking hate it. You might say, this asshole Dave on Dave's Guitar Channel recommended this record, and I hate it. And it's a high probability you won't like it, because it's not as accessible. But it's in a niche of stuff that I like. Now, if everyone here loves Led Zeppelin, but not familiar with all their albums, and I say, listen, you've got to buy Physical Graffiti. If you buy Physical Graffiti but never had it, you're going to love that album, because it's accessible and it's in your wheelhouse of what you like anyways. But the point I'm making is, when I suggest some of these records, I talked about Jellyfish on a video once. I talked about a Marvin Gaye, his second album, which was really like his first Motown feeling album. And I have the fewest amount of hits on those topics. And because people aren't really going to like it, it's okay, and it's just not that accessible. It doesn't mean it's not good, but I understand that its value is diminished because it's not that accessible. So therefore, somebody else may go listen to Stubborn Kind of Fellow, Hitchhike, Pride and Joy. And in fact, I turned somebody on to that album recently, and she called me and she's like, I love Pride and Joy. It puts a smile on my face. It's a great song. It's fantastic. Again, that album is not so accessible. It's not going to be like the greatest hits of Marvin Gaye and his biggest hits of What's Going On and How Sweet It Is, but it's just good. Anyways, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, and I love when people talk about obscure stuff, unless it sucks, and that's also in my opinion. But some of the stuff's not so accessible, and you know, it's funny because we're doing this acid jazz band, and I want to do a lot of different songs and reharmonize them to an acid jazz sound. So I suggested there's a Lenny Kravitz song called Thinking of You, and at first the guitar player loved it. The singer was like, not so much. And after a while, people are like, you know what, that's a really great song. And some of the songs grow on you. You start to realize and see the value, and you can kind of hear where it could go and what you could change to make it fit your style. You know, recently I heard there's a country band doing Fat Bottom Girls by Queen, and they made it with a country vibe. I mean, to me, really all music's somewhat similar, and everything has a different flavor, and you can put those seasoning on it. But for the most part, you know, it's like, you know, even gospel has certain changes, but if you do a few things, you can change it to a different style. Anyways, I don't want to get too much into writing and all that fun stuff, but I will just say that accessibility is definitely a viable factor in the criteria of discussing what's good. It doesn't mean that because something was not big, sucks. But for the most part, if something was huge, it was probably pretty good. It moved a lot of people, and it's a good argument that it's going to be good. It doesn't mean that it's good, but it kind of means that a lot of people went out of their way, took money that they earned, and spent it on that product. And at the end of the day, that's all you want, is to keep working. Have people pay for what you like to do, make a living, and catch as many episodes as Columbo as you can. Anyways, it's like 90-something degrees, and it's beautiful out, and I just got back in, and I'm going to go back out in a little bit. But that's all I have to say for today. I hope you're well, and very good.
Jimmy, can I talk to you now?
But you know you're a pisser.
Yeah.
You're a real pisser. You want to talk now?
Please.
Okay, let's talk. Let's get it over.
Okay.
Swear to God, I've known a poor buster like you my whole life.
Hey, who loves you more than I do, huh?
Guy.
I'd do anything for you.
Yeah, except to stop busting my balls. Come on, let's go up coffee.
Oh, you want to go to Dino or what? We'll go to Dino over there on the boulevard.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
No, which time?
Rockwood Boulevard. It's
Over
open 24 hours. So. They got Danish there? Yeah, they got everything. Real good. Yeah, let's pick up some Danish for Bell.
You're right on target. You're right on the money. Everything you said. You hit the nail right on the head with your comments, what you're saying today. You're 150% correct.